There is a story that we belong to, one of them, a story we belong to, everyone gathered in this room and beyond it. The story is what Theodore Parker, the 19th century Unitarian minister, Theodore Parker said, there is a moral arc to the universe. There's a trajectory to history, and our work is to bend that arc towards justice. There's a story we belong to. Martin Luther King called it beloved community, which is not just a community you find beloved, like your beloved coffee mug. Beloved community is a community of justice, which is what love looks like in public, a community of knowing and being known in the fullness of who we are. Jesus called that same thing the kingdom of heaven, which he said is not something waiting for us somewhere else after death, and it's not something that someone else, him included, is going to come fix for us. But it's a quality of living, it's an experience. It's something that exists in the space between us when we meet each other fully open-hearted and compassion. It's ours to build. We're part of that story, committed to it, to transformation of human community for the common good, for everyone, no exceptions. As Unitarian Universalists, we hold to the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And there's not an asterisk on that, right? It's not, we believe in the inherent, I'm looking over at it right there. There's no small print, even if you're in the back. It's not, we believe in the inherent worth of every person as long as you look masculine or feminine. It's not that we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person as long as you don't talk about or show or make visible your queerness. It's every person, period, regardless. We cisgendered people, though, need to move beyond tolerance, right? That grudging tolerance. And that means we've got some stuff to learn. So I want to share what I think amounts to like Transgender 101 today. And there are going to be some folks in this room and online where this is new information, and it's challenging and it's different. And there are going to be some folks in the room and online who feel like, yeah, we know this. Thank you. But maybe in this world, maybe talking about sex and gender and the differences between them, you feel like the rug has been pulled out from under you. Maybe you feel like, I'm talking to my cisgender folks here, maybe you feel like you grew up with a clear and common sense understanding of what gender was, and oh my God, all of a sudden, that isn't anymore. That's okay. I see you, I've been there. In our tradition, there is so much space to show up on any given Sunday with bewilderment or confusion or ignorance, and in our tradition, we don't stay there. An old Universalist clergyman asked by a reporter where the Universalists stood on some social program or another. He replied directly, "We don't stand, we move." So if we're serious about moving, let's make everything about sex and gender and sexuality more complicated than it used to be. In the old binary world of male and female, sex and gender and sexuality, it's all the same thing. We got to get more complicated. So sex means biological differences. Chromosomes, hormones in the body, internal and external sex organs. I don't often preach about sex organs. Mostly we just talk about organs in church. But that's sex, right? That's the physical stuff, anatomy. Maybe you remember from high school biology that people have 2 X chromosomes, or an X and a Y, and that determines sex. Turns out that's not true, because that's not a complete model of how sex works, how bodies works. There are people with 2 X chromosomes and a Y chromosome. There are people for all sorts of reasons might have 2X or an X and a Y chromosome, but not have the physical characteristics that are typically associated. You could have the genes for one sex, But because other genes that you have change the way those are expressed, you don't have the organs or the body shape or the other physical characteristics that typically go with those genes. And then some people are born with both sets of sex organs. And the umbrella term for all of this is intersex, and some studies suggest that 1% to 2% of all births everywhere always might be intersex. Millions and millions of people. All of which is to say that biological sex, already, the simple one, the easy one, way more complicated than either or, right? So there's sex, the physical. But on to gender. Gender's different. It may be that you're used to sex and gender being talked about, being treated interchangeably. But the way the world talks about sex and gender has changed in recent decades. Because rather than cis people, we'll get into that, rather than sort of the standard, the normal, the default, the dominant culture, defining for everyone else what their experience is, we all started listening a lot more to trans folks, to queer folks, to folks whose experience is different. And so that's changed the conversation once we invited people in and listened seriously to what those experiences are. Okay, gender role is the social role expected by society based on sex. Gender role is when boys roughhousing, they're just being boys. Girls roughhousing is inappropriate and unladylike. Why? Keep asking why. There is no reason for that. It's like the one section of the toy store being boys' toys and another section being girls' toys. Why? I agree with your silence. Yes, there's not a reason for it. Take pink. A few centuries back, pink was decidedly a male color. Men wore pink, women did not wear pink. Stuff is arbitrary, even though it doesn't feel that way. Even though we all grew up and were socialized in a culture that said, oh, of course this is the way it is. That's the way the status quo hides. It hides by shaping our common sense notions about the way that things are, and then treating those common sense notions as if that's expected, inevitable, or natural and right. So gender identity, then, is your personal experience of your own gender. Do you feel male, female, both, neither? It's internal. It's your own sense of yourself. Transgender is when your sense of your gender doesn't line up with your sex. And the opposite is cisgender, when your sense of your gender, your internal understanding and sense of it, lines up with your sex, trans and cis. The trans author and professor Jennifer Finney Boylan, born in a male body, tells this story of her experience. She says, "My earliest memory, my first sense of self, is about being transgender. When I was 2 or 3, I was sitting beneath the ironing board as my mother ironed my father's shirts. There was a sizzle of steam as she shook her blue plastic water bottle onto the cotton and pressed it against the hot iron. I was on the floor, sitting in a shaft of sunlight. She said, 'Someday you'll wear shirts like this.' And I looked at her, not understanding. I thought, why would I ever wear shirts like my father? And since then, the thought that I was somehow wired for the wrong body was never out of my conscious mind. Although my sense of what it meant to be male or female certainly grew more complex as the years went by. I remember adolescence when it was as if all the girls I knew had boarded a ship and sailed out to sea, and I was left on the dock alone, knowing that I'd somehow been left behind. Jennifer Finney Boylan, then, as a child, male sex, female gender. As an adult, After years of work and struggle and internal work, she had surgery, and not everyone does, and it's not required. It's not like an obligation, but she chose to have surgery to affirm her gender. That is surgery for her sex, her physical characteristics, to match her gender, her internal sense of self. Catherine Birdsall, who's a trans retired Coast Guard officer, tells a similar kind of story. She says, I was a compliant child, wanting to do what was expected of me. They said I was a boy, so I tried to be a boy, even though I knew I should be a girl. I thought my body would heal itself. Then everyone would know I was a girl, and in the meantime, I'd be a boy. She says, I could usually pass as a man. There were plenty of times, though, when a man would look at me like, what planet are you from then? Yo, when you look at people like that, they know you're looking at people like that. It's hard to play the role of someone you are not, day in and day out, and it became harder as the years passed until finally, at the age of 65, I knew I couldn't keep up the pretense much longer. I would go crazy or be dead. I let the cage door swing open, a little gathering support where I could. I knew I faced rejection, derision, ridicule, violence, perhaps even death. But I could no longer keep the essential me hidden and caged. This sense of gender identity not matching sex is a big part of what it means for a lot of folks to be trans. But it's also not the whole story, because part of what trans folks say is not just I was born in the wrong body, but something also that's beyond this gender binary. It's not the case for everyone that the story is I'm a male born in a female body. For some people, it's, man, I don't feel male or female. Beyond the gender binary is gender queer. And genderqueer people include those who feel their identity isn't exclusively masculine or feminine, non-binary. You might feel bi-gender or gender fluid or move between the two. You might identify as no gender, agender, or as a third gender, which incidentally is a category, neither male nor female, that many, many, many past and present cultures have. The notion of a gender binary between male and female is a distinctly European creation. One genderqueer person writes of their process of discovering their identity. I struggle because when I began to think of gender as a spectrum, right, as like a single axis, I thought that boy and girl were the poles, and all other genders had to fall somewhere in the middle between this, right? Like how much boy and how much girl do I feel? But this person says, once again, I wasn't a girl, but I wasn't a boy either. So this set me back a ways until later I realized neither was also a choice. And at first I was hesitant to embrace the label agender because of my femme expression, but no other label felt right. As a practical matter in all of this, cisgender folks may wonder what to do if you see someone and you don't know what their gender is. You're walking down the street, you see someone, is this a man, is this a woman? And I'll give you a very practical one-step guide. Here's what to do. Nothing. Nothing. You're fine, they're fine, let them live their life. Their gender is not about you at all. Do nothing, don't worry about it. Let them live. I stumble sometimes on the irony of this because I feel like this is one of the most profoundly conservative beliefs to express. Your life does not impact me, you get to live it. To me, that feels like such like a fundamentally sort of old school frontier conservative value, but apparently not. You're in coffee hour, and someone seems to you to be male with a full beard and lipstick and eyeliner and fabulous nails. Here's the question to pose to them. How was your week? Right? That does not require any comment or action from you whatsoever at all. Trans lives matter whether you're butch or femme or gender queer. Trans lives matter no matter what you look like or who you are. And there's no qualifier there. There's no caveat or catch or anything you have to do to earn it. As Unitarian Universalists, we don't stand, we move. We learn and we change and we grow, and that's our work. In that process, cis folks, I will 100% guarantee you, y'all gonna get it wrong. Gonna get it wrong over and over. Thank goodness, thank God if you like, that we are not here to be perfect. We would be in serious trouble. We are here to learn and grow and change. If you get someone's pronouns wrong and they correct you, you just say, oh, thank you, sorry about that. And you move right on. It doesn't require groveling or apology or guilt to walk away with you. Our work is just to keep on trying to do better, bit by bit. I feel like it makes it sound so simple when I say it that way. But also, I think it really is that simple. It requires some unlearning, and it requires some new learning. It requires the willingness, and in fact, the spiritual discipline and practice to see the people you meet as people, first of all. The Quakers like to say there's that of God in every one of us. And maybe that works with your theology, and maybe it doesn't, but the point being that in old school Quakerism, they'll address each other as thee and thou instead of you, as a way to honor that spark of the divine that's in them. When they greet each other and ask, how are they doing? What they're saying is, I see past whatever this presentation is to the glorious and beautiful and beloved, to the transcendent human being that is inside you. And that's our work too. Simple, difficult, onwards. Amen.